Okay, so, oh my God, this is so strange. What is this? Okay. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm Freya. I went to NYU. I'm class of 2017. I was also in tech at NYU all 4 years. And I did, believe it or not, I'm wearing the t-shirt today completely by coincidence. This was not a very like cheesy planned situation. I literally just happened to be wearing it last night and I haven't showered. So I studied computer science and economics. Can you guys see my screen, by the way?
Yeah.
Cool. I studied computer science and economics. I graduated in 2017, moved to San Francisco, joined Twitter as a product manager. While I was in school, I did two internships. One as an engineer at Google on shopping, one as a product manager at YouTube. And after I graduated, spent 2 years at Twitter as a PM. Left last August, and since then have been working at startups. So first I was in LA for a little bit, looked at a startup there, and then this year in February I moved back to New York for personal reasons and have been working with different startups since then. So I have like two halves of what I've prepared, and it's basically all like meant to be discussion heavy. So feel free to interrupt, ask questions. Like it's a small group, so we can like take our time. But basically, I have a bunch of example interview questions just to give you a sense of what interviews can be like for PM, because they're a little bit weird compared to like most other jobs. And then the first half is more about just like what is product management. So feel free to interrupt and ask questions at any point. So when I was making this slide, I was looking for a good description because I didn't, first of all, I tried to write a description and I couldn't. And then I tried to find a good description and they were just awful. So these are like the most common ones I found. First one, like people love this Venn diagram for some reason. It's like UX, tech, business, you are here, like in the middle. It's like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I definitely don't know anything about design. Like tech, okay, business, like this just doesn't mean anything, but this is one of the oldest ones that the spirit of this is basically that like PM originated as a role where these other three disciplines were very common in tech companies, but a lot of the times like one of the people from one of these disciplines would take on this more like project lead, team lead, group leader kind of role, and eventually evolved into its own role, product management. Some other descriptions I found, CEO of the product, I literally cut it out because people use it all the time and it's so inaccurate. You're not the CEO of anything. No one reports to you. Definitely not. You definitely don't have the clout of being CEO of anything. These other ones, just a lot of words, kind of didn't like them. But then I found one that I felt like was pretty accurate. So basically, as a PM, you help your team and company ship the right product to your users. And all that means is that you do a lot of different tasks and you're in charge of a lot of different things, but they all have the same goal, which is to plan and execute building features and products for your users. And so the different parts of this sentence are all kind of equally important, where you're helping the team means that you do a lot of like setting the schedule, making sure everyone's, has everything they need, making sure that like everyone has the research they need. The right product means, doing all the research to figure out what you should be building in the first place. And then to your users means like you also have to work with marketing or other disciplines to actually get your product in front of people and see how it's going. This can involve a lot of things. And so like, feel free to ask a lot of questions. I feel like I've been doing this job for 3 to 4 years now full time, and a little longer if you count my internships. And it's still been very, very different across every project, every team, every like company I've worked at. From startup to a big company varies a ton. From ads to consumer products varies a ton. Business side products or enterprise products versus social media like Twitter and YouTube varies a ton. Oops, sorry. So before I jump into like the interview side of things, does anyone have questions about just like what is PMing, what do PMs do, like how the job is similar or different to any other jobs? Like if you guys have any questions, we can talk about that now. Okay, cool. I will move on. So the second half of what I want to talk about, which is what Andrew asked me to speak about, is just the interviewing side of things and how you actually like how PMs are evaluated for jobs and internships. So I listed a couple like really popular books that I think are good, comprehensive overall, like just you can get a broad overview of. They're kind of expensive. Cracking the PM interview is $30, I think, but you can find used copies or older editions on Amazon, and it's a little bit cheaper. I've had a copy since my senior year, so 4 years ago, and I still use it before I have an interview. And so they have newer editions and stuff, but the information is mostly the same. So there's a few main types of questions, and I might be missing some too that you might encounter. First one's just the standard that any companies ask, behavioral, like tell me about yourself, tell me about a time you worked on a group project, tell me about a computer science project you worked on, things like that. I'm not going to go into those. And then one other type that you might encounter is technical questions. This varies a lot. Some companies ask them, some don't. These are straight up coding questions. I'm also not going to go into that. And then the last two are estimation questions and product design questions. And I thought the best way to go through these would just be to to show you a bunch of examples and walk you through like how you might answer some of them, because I can tell you more about like strategy, but I think examples is a much easier way, and obviously feel free to jump in. So the first thing is prep and research. I spend a lot of time preparing for interviews, both researching the company and also just practicing. I like to give the analogy that interviews for jobs are very similar to standardized testing. And so imagine like PM interviews are like the SATs. Like you can absolutely, I don't know why that just happened, but you can absolutely prepare for it. And so essentially like you want to be able to, you know the types of questions are going to be asked for the most part, and you can like design around it. You don't have to like be caught off guard. And you'll be surprised. I've done a lot of interviews, especially at Twitter. I was an interviewer a lot of the time for interns or APMs. A lot of the time we'd ask people like, what's your favorite feature for Twitter? And they wouldn't have an answer. And I'm like, literally, this is the one question you knew I was going to ask you. Or like, why do you want to work here? And I'm like, how do you not know that I was going to ask you this? And so like those kinds of questions you should just expect. Like, why do you want to work at this company? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Those are the kinds of things that like you can prepare. It's like scripted essentially. It's like if you didn't learn the lines for your own script, like no, the interviewer cannot help you. Okay, so all of these questions, I don't know how many of you have like read about PM interview questions, but they can be quite weird. But I have used the same general breakdown for all of them. So one, you want to clarify the question because the questions are intentionally vague. This is like a known thing. PM interview questions, and I'll show you an example. I'll show you a few examples. They're all insane and like very intentionally. And so you have to ask questions to break them down. Like you actually cannot answer them without talking to the interviewer more, and you'll see why. And so definitely clarify, definitely ask questions to the interviewer, because most of the time, like they want to help, but you have to help them help you. So clarifying the question, asking people to repeat the question, totally fair. Break down your thinking. Feel free to like take notes. If you're at an in-person interview, they'll often give you like pen and paper. If you're on a Zoom interview, you can often just have a notebook and say like, hey, I'm using my notebook. Interviewers are fine with that. Think out loud. This takes a lot of practice. It took me a long time, like honestly past when I was in school, to get good at this, because you're essentially like you're like solving the problem, and then you're also telling the person how you're solving the problem at the same time. And unless you're like, I don't know, the people who are really good at this are teachers. Like they do this all the time, but most other people don't have like, so unless you're like a preschool teacher in a past life, it's very unlikely you have practice with this. And so I'm too embarrassed to practice this with friends, but I just practice this on my own. So I'll be like in my bathroom, just like talking to myself. And then the last one's obviously practice. Okay, so this is the classic question that Google used to ask back in the day, which is a perfect example of an intentionally insane PM interview question. How many golf balls fit in a 747? So like, first of all, what the fuck, right? Like, how does this have anything to do with being a product manager? Like what? Like, where do you begin? How do you go from here? Does anyone have any ideas how you would answer this question? And feel free to like unmute and say anything, even if you know it's wrong. But like, where would you begin if someone asked you this in an interview?
Would you want to
Okay.
ask them? Oh, Grace, do you want to go?
Oh, I could go. Yeah. So I would say that maybe first ask about the volume of a plane, possibly, because like I'm not really like. I mean, from my perspective, if I were to be honest, I don't know what 747.
Yeah. Andrew, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say I want to ask some like clarifying questions, like, is it limited to like all the space, or like does it include like I don't know, like the bathrooms, the whatever extra storage space that you don't see when you're just in the like the passenger compartment?
Right. So these kinds of questions historically used to be like Google especially used to ask them, and this industry is a very Google-driven industry. So everyone started asking them because they were like, oh my God, if Google asked them and they have the best people, we should ask it too. And then after like 10 years, Google found out that the correlation between people who are good at answering these questions and people who are good at their job is nothing. So they stopped asking questions this ridiculous. But they still ask similar questions. The original goal of this question is just, it's an estimation question to see how you might attempt market sizing or some kind of estimation. I'll give you more realistic examples. But a question like this, the thing that they want to see from a candidate is just break it down. So you can be like, all right, so I know a golf ball is roughly this size. Let's say like this is like, you know, how many of a square centimeters I know, or cubic centimeters. I know a 747 is, I don't know, 1,000 feet long. And so the big thing that you have to start doing is you have to start stating assumptions, because you obviously don't know the exact length of a 747. And the interviewer is not expecting you to know the information, but you're going to assume some information, right? Let's say you assume it's a mile long. Like, we all know that's ridiculous and that's not how long a plane is, but like, whatever, it doesn't matter. You were just assuming that. As long as you state that that's your assumption, you're okay. And so a big thing is like stating assumptions. A more realistic version of this question that I have gotten in interviews, and in reality is actually the same question. Like, these are very similar. This question and the previous question is very similar, but this is just a much more realistic actual example. This is something you might actually calculate as a PM. And so on one hand, you know, this exact number, you might just have it available. There's probably a dashboard at the Instagram office somewhere that just has this. There's probably a link you can go to, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes you're estimating, or sometimes you look at Twitter and you're estimating how much Instagram gets done at stories, and you're trying to estimate if you should build stories. So a question like this is very, very common. These are called estimation or analytical questions. Again, intentionally vague, right? Like, on first glance, if you just read this question, like, how are you supposed to know? Like, how could you possibly know the answer to this? And the simple version is that you're not expected to know the numerical answer. No one's expecting you to answer this with the accurate, realistic number. People are just trying to see how you would approach this problem. So the first thing to remember is that the interviewer doesn't need you to, you'll come up with some answer by the end of this exercise, but the interviewer is not expecting you to be like 12 minutes. And then the interviewer goes and checks the internal dashboard and is like, yep, got it, hired. Like, that's not the point of this. The point of it is to see how you approach the problem. And so there are a few different ways to break this down, but does anyone want to attempt this problem with me? Promise, no pressure. It's just kind of boring if I just do it by myself, because I've been doing it for 5 years. Go for it, Grace. I believe in you. What we can do is you can treat me as the interviewer, so you can ask me clarifying questions, and then I'll give you the answers, and I'll also help you. And if anyone else wants to chime in, this can be like a group exercise. We don't have to just put Grace on the spot.
Okay. I feel like I'm gonna be so wrong here, but okay.
Oh, don't worry about it. That's fine.
How many users are there for Instagram, as an estimation, would you say?
So that's a good question. So one good thing that you can start by doing is, what are the different numbers you need to answer this question, right? Like, you need a few different pieces of information. Right now you have 0. What Grace just asked, that's one thing you need to know. What else do you need to know? So let's say like 1 billion is the answer, but what else do you need to know? You probably need like at the end of the day, if you're doing a calculation, you need some numbers or you need some estimates. And so what are the different things that you need to come up with this answer? So you probably need, there's a few ways you can do this. One way, for instance, is how many users total, how many stories total, average watch time, completion rate, what percentage of people log on every day. Like there's many different ways to slice this. So no one's expecting you to just pick one way, to do it the right way, but ultimately you can break this down into a few different numbers, right? Like average time spent watching stories. So the easiest way is if you knew the number of users and the number of time spent watching stories and the distribution of that, then you could find the average. But there's many different ways you can break this down. And so one way to answer this question might be, you start stating assumptions. So you say like, let's say Instagram has 1 billion users, a third of those are daily users. So every day, on average, 300 million users use Instagram. You can say, based on what I know and from what my friends do, like people post stories once a week. So you can take like the other side approach, just think how many stories are there and how many people watch it. So you can say like, those 300 million users on average post stories, maybe like half of them post stories once a week. So it's like 150 million post stories once a week. So that's like 150 million divided by 7, that's around 20 million. And then you can say like, maybe it takes 10 seconds to watch a story on average. And so basically you keep plugging in numbers into this equation, and it doesn't matter what the calculation is. Like they're not trying to see if you can answer this question, because in real life, this isn't an absurd task that you won't ever have to do, but you will never have to do it without information. If you actually work on Instagram, you don't have to like make up numbers. You just know the numbers. And so the way you break it down is you keep saying like, okay, let's assume these many users, use Instagram per day. Let's assume they watch these many stories in one session of using Instagram. Let's assume they have 4 sessions throughout the day. Let's assume they spend 10 seconds per story. They watch 7 stories per session, and so on and so forth. And then in the end, you multiply or divide or add up or whatever that calculation. And then you come up with something, right? So let's say you do all of this and you come up with 20 minutes. You're like, okay, so on average, Instagram users spend 20 minutes. Then you do a gut check. So if you come up with something like 20 minutes, and that sounds too high or too low to you. So 20 minutes sounds decently reasonable to me. But if somehow through my calculations, I came up with, on average, they spend 8 hours. That sounds a little crazy. I'm sure there's people who do it. Like I've definitely done it sometimes. But as an average, that sounds really high. So then you can gut check and say, okay, if my average number is coming out this high, then one of these numbers must be wrong. Maybe I assumed that people take too long per story or too long per session. Maybe people don't go on Instagram for 30 minutes 4 times a day. Maybe they go for 10 minutes 4 times a day, and that cuts down your whole thing by a third. And so the way that, and things like the book I mentioned, Cracking the PM Interview, they have a lot of examples like this, where at the end of the day, you want to come up with something that sounds reasonable and also that you feel like you can defend. And even if, if you go home and Google it and there's some number that's totally wrong, that's fine, as long as your argument was sound. Because like if your assumptions are wrong, that's okay. But if you assume that there are, 1 billion people in the US versus 300 million, like, yeah, they might judge you a little bit. But as long as all of your assumptions are reasonable for someone without information, it's generally okay. I'll give you some more examples of these kinds of questions. So here's another question I got once. Nope, I missed one. Okay, yeah, that. So I got this question once in an interview that was like, let's say you work for the CEO of Uber directly, and he doesn't have a lot of time. He only has time to look at a single business metric every day. And he's like, hey, Ian, can you pick one number that I look at every day and text it to me every morning? And that number should give me a rough idea. Like, one number can't capture everything, but a number that gives me a rough idea of how Uber is doing today. What number would you pick and why? And also like feel free to talk about a few different numbers and why you would pick them or why not. And so Ian, obviously, if you want to answer, go for it. Anyone else who has ideas, like let's talk about a few different options.
I mean, like I'm thinking of a little bit of like a maybe non like ideal metric, but like the first thing that came to mind for me was like the average star rating for like a trip. So like I don't know how many trips Uber has. Like they have like maybe like
Yeah.
a couple. I don't know. I'm gonna really either underestimate this or overestimate this, but they have maybe like what, a couple million trips per day. So like if you take the average like star rating, you assume like maybe like 60 to 70% of people actually fill out the survey after. And then so like you say, okay, well the average is like 4.1 stars, and then like one day it like goes significantly down. Maybe that could be like, like bigger, like a bigger metric for like, okay, things are going badly versus like if you just look at, oh, there's 10 million rides today, that may not be super helpful. So
yeah, that's a good one. I feel like a common follow-up question would be like, what is this metric lacking? Because obviously like every single metric tells you some information and like doesn't tell you, like you pointed out, this number wouldn't tell you how many rides there are. So like if the rating is 4.8 every day and then one day it's 5.0, but actually only 2 rides happened because of a system-wide failure, like that's not good, right? And the CEO wouldn't know that from that number. But obviously, like as I said, these questions are intentionally vague and intentionally extreme, and they're just intended to provoke discussion. They're not intended to be like taken seriously. It's not like the CEO who will literally only looks at one number. But yeah, that's a good choice. There's a lot of other options if anyone wants to throw out, but like some could be like percentage of rides completed, similar logic to what Ian said. Like that gives you a sense of like Uber's a marketplace. So if 70 million people request a ride in one day and only 10 million people get a ride, that sucks. But you'd never know that from the metric of just how many rides are taken. But if you look at percentage of rides completed, ultimately, if it all depends on what you view as Uber's goal, right? If Uber's goal is to have the most, highly liquid marketplace in the world and have the best taxi marketplace, then the supply and demand should be like really, really close. Like Uber's dream in that case is like, if 100 people order a ride, 100 people should be getting in Ubers. And if we only have 95 or 75 or 35 people getting into an Uber when 100 people wanted to get into an Uber, then we're failing. Or it might be like average time to get a ride, like from the moment someone presses order to the moment they get in the car, or from the moment a person opens the Uber app to the moment they're able to order. And so there's so many metrics, and this question is intentionally designed to be, it's like a fake question. Like these are all like fake questions a little bit, but they're designed to just show thinking. And so like what Ian said is like a good answer, because he not just said like the metric, and the secret here is it doesn't matter what you pick. There's like probably 15 good answers to this that are all fine, but it's more so like why you picked it. And so like in a customer-centric business like Uber, it's obviously very important to know how customers feel, and rating is like a good proxy for how customers feel. But it's also very lacking because you don't know, like if Uber just stopped working in India that day, like you wouldn't know from that metric if the rides are going well everywhere else, because the Uber riders in India just aren't rating anything. And so these questions are designed for you to think critically and also critique yourself. And the thing that I used to mess up initially was, if I realize in the middle of an answer, and this happens all the time, if you start saying something and you realize that you are wrong, and I've seen a lot of candidates do this, and I used to do this, people are embarrassed, so they double down, even though they know that they messed up. Don't do that. It's much more useful for the interviewer if you say, oh, I actually realized like my assumption was wrong, or, oh, I actually realized that I messed up this answer. Can I start over? Can I change my mind? 9 out of 10 times, the interviewer will say yes. They're not going to be like, no, you have to stick to your bad answer that you already figured out was bad. Like, that doesn't help them. And so with a lot of these, like, while you're critiquing your own answer, and always you should be like, yeah, I think this doesn't quite cover everything, but I'm happy with it. Or I think the biggest flaw of this is this other thing. And so that shows a lot of self-awareness and critical thinking, because they know that this question's on purpose challenging, but they also know that, okay, you've given one answer, you've defended your answer, but you can also defend the other thing. One type of question this reminds me of that I haven't put in my deck, but I just remembered, there's this trick that interviewers at Google used to use. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to ask, should Google buy Netflix? Or not even that. They would say, convince me that Google should buy Netflix. You'd talk for 5 minutes. Then they would say, convince me that Google should not buy Netflix. So now you're like kind of, if you're like doing the thing I was saying earlier, right? If you got too into your own argument, you're like screwed because you just argued about why the company should do something and now you have to do the opposite. But in reality, this comes up in your job all the time because as often as you're trying to convince your team that we have to build something or convince your boss we have to do something, you might realize you were totally wrong. And you have to be able to, with equal conviction, like that's a sign of a really strong, just leader in general. If you can like change your mind, but also like back it up. And so you don't want to be flippant. You don't want to be like switching your opinion for no reason, but it's more a test to see if you can argue for another position. Like if something that would happen to me constantly would be like at Twitter, I would get approval to work on a project. I would like rally up my team. We'd have like a kickoff lunch. I'd like order samosas, like everyone's happy. And then like a month later, the VP is like, yeah, no, we're cutting that project till next year. And I'm like, fuck my life. Like I just spent all this time convincing these people like this is the most important project on earth. And now I have to not only tell them that this is not the most important project on earth, I have to convince them that something else is the most important project on earth because the VP said so. It wasn't even my decision. But the times when I really feel like I performed well was when I didn't like go to the team and be like, oh my God, like fuck Kevin, like he's making me change the project. I just had to embrace it and be like, hey guys, like this other team really needs our help. So we're gonna like shelve the thing we were doing and we're gonna switch. And that's often gonna be your job as a PM. And so that's why I'm trying to explain a little bit more about like why they're testing these skills. And some people just aren't good at that. And that's not to say that you can never improve. It's like nobody is good at most of these things when they're in college, but like these are the skills you have to build out. So the next example of a question is more generic and more like almost every interview for PM roles has these kinds of questions. What is your favorite product and how would you improve it? And sometimes they'll have a twist on the twist as in variant where it'll be like, what's your favorite app? What's your favorite web product? What's your favorite physical product? Like, what's your favorite everyday product? How would you improve a toothbrush? Just like shit like that. And they're just trying to see like creativity, critical thinking. So for example, if someone asks you your favorite product and you say Instagram, you should be prepared. They're going to ask you how to improve it. They're going to ask you what you would add. They're going to ask you what you would remove. They're going to ask you what's good about it, what's bad about it. And so one thing that I did throughout college, and I think I still have it, I used to take notes in this notebook about all the products that I like talking about. And I would just build on them. So like, I love the Kindle. I've had a Kindle for 10 years now. And I would often talk about it in interviews because I knew it so well. And so I just started taking notes, like, what would I improve about it? What sucks about it? What's good about it? And so before any interview, I would just skim my notes. So it wasn't like I would just read from it, but it's more like it's fresh in my mind. But I've spent all this time like in the back of my mind thinking about it. Or like when I'm using the Kindle and like the battery suddenly dies on me without warning, I'll like write that down and be like, okay, like battery improvements. And so things like that, where I feel like this is where you can really stand out. And you don't stand out by picking like a niche product, because honestly, it's way worse if your interviewer doesn't know what you're talking about. It's totally fine to pick something like Google Maps. Like these are really exceptional products that like we take for granted that like Google Maps exists, right? But like a billion people use it every day to get around the world. Like that's crazy. And so picking something like normal, like when I was an interviewer, people would try to pick obscure things to be impressive, but it would fall flat because if I don't know what you're saying, then I can't judge the answer. So if you're telling me why your like niche fitness app is like the best app in the world, it means nothing to me because I've never seen it. Whereas if you're telling me why, you just telling me thoughtfully and honestly why Google Maps is really well made or what the shortcomings of Google Maps are, I can assess that as an interviewer much better because I actually know what Google Maps is and I've used it. And so these are the kinds of questions that are like pretty, what's the word, like predictable. So like if you're interviewing with a certain company, then they might ask you this about their own products, about like, you know, if you're interviewing with like Amazon or if you're interviewing with like Facebook, like WhatsApp, totally fair game in my opinion, unless the company is a bit more specialized, then they don't, like if it's like an ad tech startup that's like 100 people, it's less likely they'll expect you to know everything about their product. But if it's like Spotify, right? Like you should know how Spotify works if you're interviewing at Spotify. And if you've never used it till you got the interview, that's fine, but like download it on the way there. Don't like show up to the Twitter office with never having tried Twitter, which is something I've encountered so many times where I'm like, this is so easy, like it's free. Like it's fine if you've never used it till working here, but like you literally could have used it on the way here for 15 minutes just to like understand what's going on, or like with Zoom as an example. Like that's something you guys use so much now for class, for work, for events like this. Like that's a really easy product that you can take and just write down your thoughts on like how to improve it. You can say that like you think it's a really good product because like performance and reliability is really good, but you hate that like class Zooms, work Zooms, fun Zooms all look the same, and you wish you could improve like the customization, or you hate that like it assumes that everyone's face is like should be in a grid versus like more interesting layouts, or you could propose like spatial audio, things like that. There's so many different ways you can improve a product, and you're not being judged on how fleshed out or how unique or how ridiculous your idea is. You're just being judged on your articulation of it. Like some people think that like they have to say something really crazy to get noticed, but people who give the most like standard answers, like if they make a good case for it, that's great. Like that will get a great interview score because people aren't trying to rate you for being like the most unique thinker on earth. It's just like, can they look at a product and give reasonable proposals? Because in the Zoom office, they're not sitting there being like, how do we add the most like insane feature that will shock everyone? They're just being like, okay, like people use Zoom with Gmail a lot. Let's make the Gmail integration better. Like it's the small things that you will actually use in your job. And so that's what you can focus on. Another type of question, a little more, this one we should discuss more as a group. So I actually got this question in 2016, which was my senior year. The question was about the election. It was about the 2016 election. So the question was like, let's say Sundar Pichai, they always like love to give a backstory. So they'll be like, let's say like Sundar Pichai calls you and it's like, Freia, you are the lead PM for the 2016 election. And this was like a year maybe, or like 6 to 12 months before the election. So there wasn't any actual results yet, or not results, like features yet. And the question was like, Sundar has said that like all Google properties are available to you, all Google engineers are available. You can do whatever you want. What are you going to build? And so I just modified the question because the election is literally ongoing and I'm like tired of talking about it, but same question, different vertical. You are the lead PM for the 2021 Olympics and you can build whatever you want. What do you do? And so all of Google is available to you. Like remember, they own everything. Ads, search, YouTube, email, maps. They literally own like an OS, like they own everything. So they can and do a lot of fun stuff. And this is the kind of question that, again, intentionally vague, really blue sky. You can really go anywhere with it. It's a way for people to show creativity, but also to show that they can be storytellers. Sorry, they can be storytellers. They can be like, smart and strategic, but also be practical. So does anyone have any ideas for how you would answer this question? I'm gonna start calling on people like a professor. It's like the people who look the most nervous. I feel like that's what professors do. They're like, who looks like they don't want to be called on? I'm gonna call on them. Also, if you prefer, you can put it in the chat too. Although I don't know if I can look at the chat. Oh yeah, I see the chat now. All right, Lydia, you're up. And if you don't have ideas, you can say that too.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry.
What is like confusing about the question? Like, what are you thinking about?
I don't know. This is my first time just even exploring product management, so
yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, that will also be true when you interview for stuff. Karina, what about you?
I don't know. The only idea I had was it's not very good. Do you know the dinosaur game that you get when there's no connection? I thought maybe for like a few weeks or so leading up to the Olympics, you can like create different games based on the Olympic categories and stuff.
That's cute.
sorry, would it be better to go like bigger for this or smaller? Like, because like part of me is like integrate this into like every one of Google's products, but also like, or just do like one big thing, like I don't know, that could be a huge engineering challenge to say like integrate this somehow in like every one of Google's products because they own everything.
Yeah.
Like,
so I think
something like NORAD, like when they do like the Santa tracker thing every year. Integrate this like into like its own like mini game style thing.
Yeah. I think that the key for questions like this is to have two parts of your answer. One part that's like, what's the word for it? Like the approach essentially, and the other part that's like the actual features. So for example, I don't know, I haven't thought of this. I like literally made this deck before this. So an example of an answer can be like, okay, we have like 3 principles for how we want to tackle the Olympics. Like one, we want to celebrate the Olympics because we think it's like a really awesome, like world uniting event. And, you know, it's not at all political or partisan. We want to make sure we like make it a fun experience. And we really want to like spotlight it. We think like the Olympics are great. Second principle is that we want to be informative, but we don't want to be annoying. Like this year, all the like get out the vote things and all of these apps have been really fucking annoying because they are just like nonstop. And it's like, yeah, like I fully support civic engagement, but like I'm not a US citizen. And no matter how many times Instagram tells me to vote, I can't vote. Like it's literally illegal. So you don't want to be like that. You don't want to be annoying. You want the people who like the Olympics to have fun with it. And you want the people who don't like the Olympics to be able to just X the fuck out of it forever. And so it should be like, you should allow opt-out, essentially. Second principle. So first principle, celebrate the Olympics, feature it, you know, have fun with it. Second principle, allow people to opt out who don't want to be in it. And let's say third principle, I don't know, literally making this up. 3 is a good number though, it sounds smart. You have 2 principles, kind of sucks. Let's say the third principle is that we really want to promote the people watching the Olympics, let's say. So then you can break it down by like, okay, to celebrate the Olympics, we can have fun with the logos and the different properties. So like the Google Doodle, when you go to the homepage, we can have different themed, you know, rowing, running, we can have different themed ones every day. On YouTube, we can highlight like the schedule, we can highlight the free streams, we can make it really easy for people to find it. On what else do they own? Like on maps, we can have little like characters running around, things like that. Or if people are in the city where the Olympics is, I think it's Tokyo. In Tokyo, we can like have special things in the maps for like the Olympic Village. And so essentially you're like separating your answer into like, here's my broad strategy. So to Ian's point, like, should you go big or should you go small? I think the best answers usually have both. Like you go like, another version of this question can be like, what should Uber do for Christmas, right? Like all of these apps are like, what should Postmates, what should Seamless do for Pride? Like all of these things are like, it's become a big theme for companies to have these kinds of special projects that are just one-off like fun things. That's a little bit of marketing. It's a little bit like, you know, like delight the customer. Like maybe if you're Seamless, if you're a paid product, you can combine like the marketing push with a discount, right? Where you can be like, use the code PRIDE today for $10 off. And also like the Seamless logos in rainbow or whatever. And so a lot of these things, they're trying to assess if you just notice all these details, because like we are all consumers of these products and have been for like most of us grew up with these. And second, like if you can think of these things on the spot, because like the person who actually does this at Google, they spend years planning this. So the point is not for you to have a better idea than them. The point is just like, can you get into the kind of ideas that like, do you have a sense for what's practical, right? Like if you were to be like, let's fly everyone to the Olympics, like, no, you can't do that. Or if you were to be like, you know, let's make like watching the Olympics free, if it's not usually, and I have no idea if it is because I don't really watch it, like again, kind of silly. But if you can work within the constraints of like, you know that Google Doodles are a thing, you know the dinosaur game's a thing, you know like Christmas tracker is a thing, and you can use what you know to come up with new ideas. Like that's really just what they're trying to see. Let's see, I forgot if I have more questions. Okay, I think this is the last one. Yeah, okay. Last question, again, a real question. I haven't been asked this, but I've asked this question many times because it's one of Twitter's favorite questions. And if you interview at Twitter and you get this question, you have never met me. Never happened. Okay, so here's how the question goes. Our researchers created a GPS technology with 100% local accuracy of any person or object in the world. What do you do with it? An example is like, I don't know if you guys can see my living room. So it's like, this technology somehow magically gives you my location down to the centimeter, the location of my desk that my computer is on right now, the location of this bookshelf that's behind me, that painting, that other painting, that bookshelf there, my projector on top, that light, every single thing is like perfectly mapped out. And you have access to like the perfect information of where everything is, like where all of you are, where all the stuff in your room is, you know, very, very close location. And assume you work anywhere, like it doesn't matter what company you work, and there's no cost limit. There's no, you have to, but you're the only person in the world who has this technology, so you can build something like really amazing. What are some of the things you would build or consider building with this like perfect accuracy of location? And I've heard like some really good and some really stupid answers to this question. So I'm gonna ask you all to like try, because I promise you nothing you tell me is worse than something I've already heard. And I'll give you some examples just to get you thinking. Some people immediately think of crisis relief. So for example, like there's a hurricane or there's some kind of natural disaster and people are displaced. And this can be a way to like actually easily find them, because that's a really big challenge. Like someone's missing in, you know, a national park, like the government can use it to find them. So you can make like whatever the word, like search and rescue. Or if, you know, like there's a hurricane somewhere and they've lost power and stuff, but if you know where everyone is, you can send them, either send people to rescue them, or if you need more time for that, you can send them food, send them supplies using drone technology. You can really go anywhere with this. And so you're not being judged on like, you know, like, are you the best person at applying the technology? It's just like, same thing as all the other ones. How can you come up with ideas and then walk through your own ideas? And so I've heard like disaster relief, I've heard like things around like transportation, where like make bus routes more efficient if you know where everyone who uses the bus like actually lives, because the bus routes might not be in the optimal locations. I've heard like one of the worst ones I heard, not because it's like bad, I was just like, you serious? Someone was like, I would use it to figure out like which libraries are the busiest on campus. And I was like, bro, you can do that with Wi-Fi already. Like every year, someone at a college hackathon makes that project. Like you don't need hyper local. Like you can just walk into Bobst and know how busy it is. Like you don't need this like world-class technology to know this. And so it's not like a bad answer in itself, but like, you know, you have to defend it well. So does anyone have any ideas? Oh, one that I just thought of that I guess has never been relevant before is contact tracing, because COVID is a big application. This contact tracing essentially uses this. Obviously, it's not as local, but if you knew exactly where everyone was all the time, and then if you found out that someone is sick, then you can know exactly who is at risk around them and who else they might have come in contact with. That's a big one. You guys have other ideas?
I feel like this is also a dumb idea, but maybe like in a retail setting, you can use it to track merchandise, like who's stealing merchandises, because I feel like that like stores do tend to have losses like annually due to like shoplifting. And I think that would be really useful to keep merchandise in check, and like you can know like when someone takes something.
Yeah, true. Inventory management in general. Does anyone have other ideas?
My brother's right next to me, and he suggested autonomous driving.
Yeah, hi Lydia's brother.
Hi.
Yeah, because like, if you know everyone is, you can just pick it up like delivery. But
yeah.
I guess like the first thing I thought of would be like if you have large concerts or like stadiums and you have a lot of people, you don't need, I guess you would just have more efficient ways to track people down
Yeah.
to seats and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, like finding people more easily. Yeah. I think in general, like, oh, go for it.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, this kind of goes along with that. I'd fix Apple Maps because I shouldn't have to scan the buildings near me for them to know where I am. That feature is like the one that bothers me. That's
Yeah. I think like the biggest thing with these kinds of questions is like, how can you take something that is, you know, seemingly small, like, or seemingly like not a big, like GPS technology is pretty good in the world, but how can you take like this technological change and then project it out to something that's actually like user friendly? Because this does happen at companies a lot where, you know, some more like researchy department or like, you know, sometimes they work with like academic labs, like if they find out something, or even your own like user UX research teams within the company, if they find out some insight or some piece of information that's not exactly applicable in its existing form, like can you do something useful with that? Like if I were to tell, like something that happened when I worked at Twitter was that researchers found out that people in Japan were having a lot more civil discussions than people in the US, and they really dug into it, and they found out that one of the reasons in Japanese, Korean, and Chinese this was true is that those languages are more character, I forgot what the word is, but basically the characters pack more information. Like English is a highly inefficient language in comparison to like Japanese, Korean, and Chinese because each character says much less. Like you need to form like half a syllable in English, you need like 3 letters, you know? And so what they found out was that Twitter has this character limit, right? And in Japan, people are able to say a lot more in 140 characters than they could, relatively speaking, in English. And so they were able to have more longer back and forth, which allowed them to give more nuanced opinions. And they came back to the team with this information and they were like, people in Japan and Korea, but Twitter is banned in China. So, but people who use it in Chinese, there's still like some groups of people abroad outside of China who use Twitter in Chinese. They are having more nuanced discussion because literally the character limit favors them because they can say more in their languages than we can say in English or in other languages like Russian or Swedish. And so the team like did a lot of brainstorming with that insight and eventually doubled the character limit because for Western languages, and the character limit remained the same for Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. And so now Twitter's 280 characters in English and similar languages, and it remains like 140 for like Japanese, for instance. And that was an insight that like the time between the research team finding out that insight and like Twitter actually using it was quite long. And it's not something that you can like directly apply, or something that I read, Facebook released a research paper a few years ago about how if the top comment on a post was of a certain tone, so like really rude or really nice or really excited, then if you go to comment on a post and you see the top comment has a certain tone, you are most likely to mimic that tone, even if your original reaction was not in that tone. So if you see a really angry comment at the top of a post, even if you weren't angry, once you see that comment, like, so if the post didn't make you angry, but the first comment is angry, you are more likely to be angry. And so what they started doing with that information was intentionally downranking or upranking by tone. And so they were like, okay, for public pages, for example, so this isn't like, you know, for your like profile picture, but like for public pages, they started ranking it such that they had more positive or like civil kinds of comments at the top, because then new comments would be more civil, versus like organically, if you just look by upvotes or by likes, angry and polarizing or even like racist comments tend to float to the top because people reward that. And so Facebook started like adjusting how they do comments on public posts. And so there's often like this kind of research behind the scenes that researchers or professors or whoever do, and then they give it to the company and the PMs, and the PMs are sitting there like, what do I do with this? And you have to translate it into actual user-friendly ideas. And that's what these kinds of questions are trying to test, not trying to test like what you actually would do with this. They're just trying to see if you can take what is essentially an abstract concept, which is this new technology or new research finding, and translate it into something that you and I would actually use in a tool like Facebook. So that was all of my slides and my example questions. Does anyone have any follow-up questions overall about anything I said or anything else that I didn't say? Feel free to just go for it. Okay, cool. We are right on time then. I linked a resource that me and Terry, who used to be the Tech at NYU president when I was in Tech at NYU like 4 years ago, she and I were both PMs at Twitter after NYU, and we wrote this resource together because people used to ask us a lot of questions about the Twitter APM program. So we just wrote this like 1-page interview guide, but it links to a lot of other things. So it links to a lot of other like resources, articles. Some of them might be outdated, honestly, because we wrote this a while ago. We wrote this like, I think 3 years ago, but also, let me add my email. This is my email. I just put it in the Zoom chat. If you guys have any questions or like want to do mock interviews and stuff, I haven't really done any mock interviews before, but I've like helped people practice answers. Let me know. And if you have like other questions that I can answer, feel free to email me.
Cool. Thanks, Freya. Thanks for coming and giving us talk.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming at 7 on a Friday. It's like, I guess everything's closed, so what else would you be doing? I would definitely not be at a technical review event at 7 on a Friday when I was in school. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions, but if not, enjoy your weekend. Bye everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.